I've just been told my microphone was off. I swear I turned it on before. Jeez. I thought third time lucky maybe I wouldn't cause any technical problems, but it looks like we'll have to go for fourth. Welcome back today though. We're talking about focusing today. Oh, geez, I'm in a fluster. And it's an incredibly important thing that we're going to cover. Focusing, I would say, is the most important technical attribute of photography. And if you don't nail focus when you're getting the photo, there's not really much you can do it when you go to fix it down the track. Before I get started today though, I just wanted to remind everyone that we are still open at the moment. Our opening hours are reduced. They're from 11 till 4. But if you need to come in and buy anything, we're there to help you. We do encourage you to buy online though, obviously, and try and practice social distancing. And our online store is working as per usual. If you have any questions, you're also welcome to email me at school@michaels.com.au, or you can give us a call. The phone number is 9672 2222. So that's quadruple 2 at the end there. All right, but let's get into the topic of today, and we're going to talk about focusing. Now, focusing, I find, is a little bit daunting. It's a little bit confusing, particularly if you're unfamiliar with how the camera operates and which focusing mode to use for which situations. This is another thing that automatic mode doesn't do very well. So in automatic mode, the camera is trying to guess which focusing options it should choose. Often it does that too slowly and the moment's gone, and often it doesn't choose the right ones. So if we can choose our own focusing modes before we start taking photos, it gives us a lot more precision. And that way, when we get to shooting, we get to capturing those images, we're not missing image after image. We're actually getting the photos that we want. So why is focusing important? Well, I said just a little bit before that it's not something we can really fix in post-production. There are some ways of sharpening image in programs like Photoshop and Lightroom. They're mostly designed to sharpen already sharp photos, though they can fix slightly blurry images. But if your image is out of focus, really, there's not much you can do about it. You just sort of have to throw it away. And you don't want that to be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. We talked yesterday the day before about aperture. And today, the focusing modes that we're going to choose will be used in conjunction with aperture. So someone asked this question the other day, but the camera focuses on a plane, and that plane is parallel to the image sensor. And then we stretch out the depth of that focus using aperture. So the two are used in conjunction, and you'll get a feel for things after a while and be able to marriage the two of them up quite nicely. But it, of course, like everything, takes a little bit of practice. The other thing that cameras tend to do is they tend to focus on things that are closest to them. This is another reason why the automatic mode doesn't work too well, because you don't necessarily want to focus on the thing that's closest to you in the frame. If you wanted to focus on this plant in the background, for example, the camera would keep locking on me, or maybe even my computer screen at the front here. And that's not going to be much good. It's very hard to override that as well. So we need a system that's a little bit more consistent and a little bit more precise. The two main focusing options we have are manual and autofocus. We're going to talk about the both of them today, talk about why you might want to use one or the other. There are some advanced focusing techniques too. I'm going to save them for a separate class where we can talk about things like back button focus, hyperfocal distance, which you need to start to customize your settings a little bit more, need to start doing some calculations. We're just going to stick with general things today. And I'll try and keep things as general as possible. However, the terminology used and the symbols used for focusing vary greatly from manufacturer to manufacturer, sometimes even between the models within certain manufacturers. So if you're unfamiliar with one of the terms I'm using in relation to your specific camera, maybe just leave a comment for me and I'll try and address it, but I'll attempt to have a broad brush and talk generally so that everyone knows what's going on. All right, let's start with autofocus, which is probably the most sort of common focusing mode you're going to use, though manual focus does have its uses. I will say actually before I go into it, what I'm going to do today is sort of talk generally about all the different options we have. I don't have any images to show you today, but I am going to do a demonstration using the camera that I'm actually streaming with. Fingers crossed that works okay. I had a couple of hiccups when I was doing some tests, but I should be better prepared than I was yesterday, and we'll just see how it goes. We'll roll with the punches. So, autofocus. When we're using autofocus, generally the way that our cameras are set up, at least out of the box, is that when we half press the shutter button down, the camera locks on focus. The way that it chooses what it should lock on focus is constrained by something called the focus area. So in automatic, generally the focus area is very wide. Normally the entirety of the selection of focus points the camera has can sometimes be all the way across the sensor. And you may have seen this before if you've been using automatic mode, where there's a whole bunch of rectangles lighting up all over the place. And there's one up there, and then you take another photo and it's down there, and then in the middle, and then there's three of them. And it's very erratic. You know, there's no precision in this mode, and the camera's just guessing really what it thinks it should be sharp. But we don't want to guess. We want to tell it exactly what we want to be in focus. So one of the best ways of controlling that is with the focus area. We can either make a focus area very big or very small. The smaller it is, the more precise, but the harder it is to control, particularly with things that are moving throughout the frame. Now, different styles of photography, different sort of subjects, different environments will require different things. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we go. I typically use a very small focus area. I use it for pretty much every photograph I take. An exception though at the moment is while I'm doing this stream, I'm actually using a very wide focus area. And that's so as I move around the frame, the camera keeps focusing on me. Otherwise, I'd pretty much just have to stand still because there's no camera operator. It's just sitting on a tripod. So that's one of the first things that we can choose. Now, the focus area, you generally choose it either through a button on your camera or through the quick menu. So I can't remember if I spoke about the quick menu yet with you all, but I'm going to run through the buttons just quickly again for everyone, even if I haven't done it. The quick menu is a way we can access practical sort of things we need to change while we're actually photographing. Main menu's a nightmare, and we want to try and avoid going in as much as possible because it takes a lot of time to work out where you're going, and the terminology used in there is super confusing. Now, on higher end cameras, you'll generally have a dedicated button for changing your focusing mode and your focusing area. This Nikon, for example, has an autofocus button on the front here, which is denoted by the letters AF. Now, you may also see a symbol you'll use to change focusing areas. And I'm actually just going to draw something for you quickly here on my whiteboard. Now, this symbol changes from manufacturer to manufacturer, but it follows this sort of general look here, where you've basically got like a bigger rectangle or some brackets with some smaller rectangles in between. This can come in a number of different shapes too. You know, sometimes it's sort of like this here. It really is really hard to make a generalized one. But if you can't find an AF, the letters AF, anywhere on a button on your camera or on your quick menu, then have a look for a symbol with some sort of rectangular structure to it. Not to be confused with the drive mode, which is another mode that we can change. We'll talk about that down the track, but it also uses rectangles. Manufacturers don't like to make it easy for us, that's for sure. Now, the place to look for these sort of things if you can't find a button is in the quick menu. I'm going to read out a list. We'll see if I remember all the manufacturers, but yell out if I don't. Nikon, it's the cursive I button. Canon, it's the Q button, sometimes called Q set. Fuji uses, it's also a Q button. Panasonic uses, it's a Q menu button. Normally Q menu is written in grey text next to one of the other buttons, so have a look for that somewhere around the other button systems. Sony, it's the function button, which is FN, and Olympus, it's the OK button in the middle of the directional pad. So that should be everyone, I think. If you've got a Leica, if you're one of the lucky people who have a Leicas, they actually generally don't have quick menus, but the main menu system is very simple. That's one thing Leica get right, is a very simple, easy to use menu system. They're actually a wonderful camera to shoot with. So that's where we're looking for these sort of things, okay? Just to generally sort of point a broad stroke. If you can't find where you're looking for, jump to your camera's manual and see if you can find the term focus area or focus zone, something like that there. That should direct you to the right place to look to where to change it, to either a wide or a small zone. Now, why would we want to use a wide zone when a small zone gives us more precision? Well, a wide zone can be useful for things that are unpredictable. One example that I sort of thought of is if you're photographing, say, a 100-meter sprint, and you want to focus on the person who's going to be coming first. You don't have time to sort of, and say, imagine we're looking down the track, so the runners are coming towards us. Now, in this situation, you wouldn't have time necessarily to move your focus point around if you're using a very small focus point. So we could set a wide focus zone in this instance, and because we know the camera is going to pick up the thing that's closest to us, when we start to autofocus, it should pick up the front runner. Notice I say should. Doesn't always work, but it's going to give us the best chance. All right, now we've talked a bit about focus area, and I'm going to show you how to change this a little bit down the track, but the other thing we can choose is focusing mode. Now, there are a few sort of main modes that we can choose to focus. There's single autofocus, continuous autofocus, and then there's tracking modes, such as face recognition. Let's run through the three of these, talk about how they work, and then I'll direct you how to change that on your camera as well. Now, in single autofocus, when we half press our shutter button down, the camera locks in focus on whatever's behind the focus point, and as long as we keep our finger half pressed down on the shutter button, the camera's focus will stay locked in at this distance. This is really useful for doing a technique called focus locking, which I'll talk a little bit about down the track. I have a little slide to show you in regards to that. Now, I use single autofocus with a small focus point and focus locking for like 90% of the candid sort of photos I take. So if I'm doing street photography, if I'm just doing photos of friends around the place and I don't want to fiddle with things too much, it's a really good combination of settings because it's very flexible, allows you to mix up compositions a lot, while also maintaining good consistent focus and not having to fiddle with settings all the time. The next main mode is continuous autofocus. And in continuous autofocus, when we have our finger half pressed down on the shutter button, what the camera does is it continuously updates focus on whatever's behind the focus point. So if something moves closer or further from you, the camera will update focus until we're ready to take the photo. This is really useful for photographing things that are moving because we want to make sure that we've gotten focus before we take the photo. And we want to be ready to take the photo before something interesting happens, because if you try and get focus while that interesting thing is happening, it's already too late. So we use continuous autofocus to half press down, wait, and then boom, take the shot and you've got the moment. That's really useful as well. We can't use it with focus locking though. We'll see why in a little bit. So you sort of got to choose one way or the other. A lot of cameras also have a smart mode, which is sort of a combination of both continuous and single autofocus. This goes under a couple of different names. My Nikon, for example, I believe uses the term AFA. I think my Sony does as well. This is the one we want to avoid using. This is the one that the camera chooses in automatic mode, and it doesn't work super well because it's trying to guess and it doesn't update quickly enough. If something's stationary, it'll be on single autofocus, but then as soon as something starts moving, it's sort of got to like change its mind, and it's just not really going to give you consistent results. So the way that I think about it is that if something's going to potentially move, I'll put my camera in continuous autofocus. If it's stationary or if I can control the situation, I'll put it in single autofocus. Now, the most modern innovation with camera focusing is tracking. There are often two modes for tracking. There's subject tracking and there's facial recognition. I love facial recognition. Works really well when you're wanting to take photos of people. And in our studio classes, so when we're shooting studio portraits, I'm using facial recognition or eye detection all the time, and I hardly ever miss a photo. It's just, it almost makes things too easy. A lot of camera manufacturers are bringing in eye detect for animals now too. So, you know, when we were talking about pet photography the other day, if you had eye autofocus on your camera, you could use it doing that sort of thing and make it really, really easy to get consistent photos. What subject tracking does is you choose the thing that you want your camera to track. Generally that means pointing the focus point at it before you start focus, half pressing the shutter button down, and the camera will lock onto that while it's still in the frame. I have varied success with subject tracking. It really depends on what the subject is and how different it is from the background, because the camera can have a little bit of a struggle sometimes. I found at the zoo, for example, trying to subject track, so not eye autofocus, but subject track something like a tiger. The camera has a lot of trouble because animals are made to be camouflaged, right? So the camera has a hard time distinguishing the animal from the background. All right, so they're the main modes. Most of them you should be able to access through the quick menu. Sometimes things like facial recognition and subject tracking you need to jump into the main menu for, but have a look in your manual if you can't see it immediately obvious to you. Generally, the focusing mode is in the similar sort of place to where the focus area is too, so the two sort of go hand in hand. If you can find one button or find one in the quick menu, the other one's probably somewhere close to it. I will say too that there is one manufacturer who uses slightly different terminology, and that's Canon. So Canon use the term servo for continuous autofocus and one shot for single autofocus. So they're the terms you want to look for as a Canon user. If you're a different sort of user, so Nikon, Sony, Olympus, Panasonic, pretty much everyone else, what you're looking for is a combination of the letters AFS for single autofocus or AFC for continuous autofocus. Sometimes that's AFS, sometimes it's SAF or CAF or AFC, or it could just be the letters S and C too. So I know it can a little bit confusing trying to tell you exactly where to find it on your specific camera model, but have a look and see if you can find it. If not, consult the manual. Maybe otherwise send me an email or something like that, and I might be able to give you a hand. So that's autofocus down pat. Next is manual focus. Now, manual focus is a little bit trickier because we've got to dial things in ourselves, but there are a couple of times when manual focus is useful. Particularly in low light, our cameras really struggle to focus. So if you're trying to take photos at nighttime or maybe in a dark museum or something like that, the camera might not necessarily be able to focus on what's in front of it. And we can use manual focus instead to dial in that focus ourselves. The other thing too is that cameras need contrast in order to get focus as well. So if you're trying to focus on something that has a relatively continuous tone, so this blank wall behind me for example, the camera's not going to be able to focus on this, whereas I could dial in the focus myself using manual focus. When that happens it gets something called focus hunting, and I'll show you what that looks like a little bit in a second. Now, it is a little bit tricky to manually focus just looking at the entire image. So there are a couple of tools that our camera gives us in order to help us manually focus. One of those things is called live view magnification. That goes under a couple of different terms. But what happens basically is the camera sort of zooms in on the image so you can see it a bit closer and dial in the focus a bit more precisely. And there's another tool called focus peaking, which a lot of manufacturers are using now. I'm going to show you what the two of those look like, but focus peaking basically puts a red outline around something whenever it's sharp. Okay, so what else am I want to talk about here? Do I want to talk about anything? I might get up and show you a couple of these different things through a demonstration on the camera. Okay, so we've got a little toy today, Moosey here. It's going to give us a hand while we're taking some photos. I'm going to jump up, swap over to my camera now, and show you a couple of these options. Just bear with me for one tick because I've got to fiddle with things a little bit first so you can actually see what's happening on my camera screen. And I'll just move the microphone there so you can hear me. All right. Okay, so you should be able to see what I'm seeing when I look through the camera now. And I'm in movie mode at the moment because we're recording this stream. But I'm going to jump out of movie mode just for a second and go to manual mode. But any of these focusing settings work in any of the modes. So aperture priority, shutter priority, program mode, they won't work in automatic though. Generally with automatic, you don't get any choice. So I've got a couple of places that I can choose focus on my camera, but I'm going to jump into the quick menu here so you can see what this is like on my Sony. Now, the symbol that I've got highlighted at the moment is wide autofocus area. And if I click into this, I've got a number of different options for choosing a focus zone, wide, zone, center, and then flexible spot. The flexible spot one is the one I use the most when I'm taking photos. But I'm just going to click back onto wide and jump in front of the camera for a second, because I have face tracking on at the moment, and yes, you should see, so there's a square around my face now, and that's following me around the frame. Now, on my Sony, if I didn't have a wide focus zone selected for this, my face, when it went out of the focus area, would stop being tracked. So I've got to keep the focus area wide so that my camera will track my focus around the frame. But as you can see, this is doing a fairly good job. It's actually focusing on the plant in the background, I think. Now, it's hard to look at the screen and look at the camera at the same time. But it's, of course, as soon as I try and demonstrate it, it's not doing what I want it to do. Generally, it works quite well. It might actually be because I'm in manual mode, I think, rather than movie mode. So it's not live updating as I'm standing in front of it. If I swap it back, I'm just going to quickly do that. Swap it back into movie mode. And I think this will sort it out. Yeah, there we go. So what was happening before is the camera was needing me to actually push the focus button in order for it to engage the focus properly. In movie mode, it's just continuously updating all the time because we're recording all the time. Now, the one thing I will say about facial recognition is it's great when you want to take photos of people. It's really annoying when you don't. So if you're trying to take photos in the street and you've got facial recognition on, but you want to take a photo of some architecture in the background or something like that, the camera will keep locking onto people's faces and you can't really override it. It can drive you a bit bonkers sometimes. It's also not great too if you've got a group of people, because the camera's basically got to choose someone to focus on, and generally it's not going to choose the right person. So sometimes it's best when you've got a group of people just to turn facial recognition off and choose the focusing yourself. I'm going to jump back up there and jump onto my camera. We'll jump back into manual mode so I can demonstrate a couple of these other things. And I'll grab Moosey again here now. All right, so that's our focus area. What I'm going to do for the next demonstration is just change this to flexible spot. So what you can see now is I've got this really, really small rectangle on my screen. And I can move this around so I can change it to focus on different points within the image. Now, the way that you move this, again, changes from manufacturer to manufacturer. Sometimes you've got to press a button to sort of engage it first and then use one of your control dials or use the directional pads. I just recommend going to the manual to try and work that out at this stage. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to this plant here. And because my focus point is over the plant, when I press my focus button down, the camera should lock focus onto that. And I think I'm in, just going to double check, yes, I'm in continuous autofocus at the moment. So let's grab Moosey here, and we're going to half press the button down and focus on Moosey. Now, because I'm in continuous autofocus, the camera is continuously updating focus on whatever's behind that focus point. So if I move the moose forwards or backwards, and it's hard to do this and press the button and look at the screen at the same time, but the camera is updating focus as moose moves forwards and back. And if I move him away from the focus point, what it does is it locks focus on the plant behind us, because that's what's underneath the focus point now. Move the moose back and it should lock focus back on him. So you can see how this is useful for things where the distance is changing regularly between what you're photographing. Now I'm going to swap over to the other mode now. Jump back in the quick menu, go to AFC, and you can see I've got AFA, that's the smart, and I'm going to smart in inverted commas, that's the one you want to avoid. AFS is the other one we want to talk about. So if I press my button down now and lock in focus on the moose, and I move him away, the camera doesn't update focus. The focus stays locked in at that original distance. And this is really, really useful for when we come to doing focus locking down the track. If I wanted to get focus again now, what I'd need to do is release the focus button, half press down again, and then the camera would refocus, all right? I'm just gonna focus back on the moose here. Now I'm gonna go over this area of blank wall. And let's have a look what happens when I try and focus on this section here. Oh. The camera's actually not doing too bad a job. It seems to actually be picking up that wall, surprisingly. But you can see it's having a little bit, it's sort of going in and out of focus a bit first, struggling a little bit. I wonder if it's going to have a harder time if I go to continuous autofocus, because I'd like to see this work properly. Yeah, there we go. So now the camera is not picking up that focus at all. This is what we call focus hunting. So you've got to avoid pointing your focus point towards sort of textureless, detailless sections of the image. If I go back to that plant now and get focus, it should lock onto it straight away. No problems. All right, let's jump out of autofocus now and go to manual focus. Now on my camera, I have a manual focus switch on the lens. You might have a button somewhere that changes to manual focus depending on what your system is. But have a look for the letters MF somewhere. That's generally how you do it. Now, with my camera, the way it's set up at the moment, if I start to manually focus, you can see there it actually zooms in automatically for me. I'm going to go over to the plant here. It's a little bit hard for me to see at this distance, but this is the live view magnification. I think they actually call it manual focus assist on the Sony. But by zooming in on the image, it just makes it a lot easier for me to see what's actually going on. And I can sort of dial that in as I need to and go, okay, it looks to be about sharp there from where I'm standing, though may not be the case because the image is tiny on the screen that I'm looking at. Now, the other thing I wanted to show you was focus peaking, but I don't think this works through the stream for some reason. I'm just going to go into my menu here and make sure I've actually got it turned on. So this is something that you need to jump into your main menu for. There it is, peaking color. Yeah, it is on at the moment. Okay, so it's just not coming through on the feed. What I'll do is I'll jump back and I'll show you a slide for the focus peaking. And we'll also talk about focus locking as well. But before I do that, I'm going to go back to a wide focus area. I'm going to change my camera back into autofocus. And I'm going to change it to autofocus C, which is already on. So now, and go back to movie mode. Oh, so many steps to follow. Now when I jump back down, oh no, hang on, one more thing I want to change. Get in here, go back to my display, and what a nightmare these menus are. HDMI settings, and we'll take that off. All right, now we should be back to where we started, and fingers crossed once I sit back down, yeah, camera locks focus on me. Beautiful. All right, so I'm just going to jump over to my screen now for a second and we'll have a look at a couple of slides. I'll show you what focus peaking looks like and I'll show you what focus locking is. Let me pull up my display here and we'll go across there. Let's talk about focus peaking first. So this is a slide from our video class. Focus peaking is really useful for video because we do often manually focus in video and it's a quick, easy way of seeing what is and isn't in focus. So what the camera is doing is it's highlighting the things that are sharp in the image with this red outline. And basically you can sort of move the focus back and forth and the red outline will change from place to place depending on what's in focus. So I use this a lot for video. I mainly use live view magnification for when I'm shooting stills. Jump out of there and go to our focus locking slide. So this is from our understanding a new camera class, our beginners class. And this is focus locking here. And this is the thing that I use for like 90% of those sort of casual photos that I'm taking. So we're using single autofocus, which is one shot if you're using a Canon. We're using a single small focus point, and that focus point is in the middle of the frame. Now, say we've got this situation here where I've got a subject on the left-hand side. I want them to be sharp and I want the background to be blurry. I'm controlling that with my aperture, but my focus point's in the middle at the moment. So if I try and get focus on this, it's going to focus on the building in the background. Now, one thing I could do is move that focus point over to the left-hand side, but that takes a few seconds, and sometimes a few seconds is too long. And if I move it over there and I decide I want a different composition, maybe I'll need to move it back to the right-hand side, and that takes more seconds. And seconds are precious in photography. The more time we save, the more likely we are to get the photo. What I can do instead, though, is just recompose my shot so that my focus point is over my subject, half press my finger down to lock in focus, and because we're in single autofocus, the camera stays focused at that distance the entire time we have our finger pressed down. So I hold my finger half down on the shutter button, recompose my original composition, and then fully click in order to commit to the shot. Really straightforward and really versatile, because what I could do is I could take a number of different photos with different compositions. If there are a whole bunch of different subjects around, I could shoot different people with different compositions without ever having to fiddle with my focusing area, change the focus point position, or fiddle with the autofocus mode. Super, super useful. I use this one all the time. I'm going to jump out of there and we'll go back. We're almost done with this class for today. I'm going to have a look, maybe a couple of questions in the comments section, but if you've got any questions, make sure you just yell out. The only other thing I really want to touch on is reviewing your images. So it is good while you're shooting just to quickly look at photos by pressing the little play button on the back of the camera. So same as the play button on your remote control for your TV or something like that. That'll pull up your images, and then what you want to do is zoom into them. And the reason we need to zoom into them is because when you're looking at something on the back of the screen like this here, pretty much everything is going to look sharp. And then you get home, you put it on your computer, and all of a sudden, once it's this big, you realize you've missed the focus. And well, too late to go and fix it then. So it's a good idea to check while you're going. The way that you zoom into your photos changes from model to model. The places to look are for a little magnifying glass somewhere in your camera system. So the symbol looks something like, let me rub this out, something like this here, or maybe this with a plus button or something like that. That's a magnifying glass in case you can't tell. So see if you can see a button like that somewhere on your system. The other thing is that often on cameras, you just use one of the control wheels. So when you've pressed the playback and you spin one of those control wheels around, it'll zoom you in and out of the photo. So that's another place to look. All right, let's have a look here and I'll see what the questions are. Stephen's having problems. All right, Stephen, I'll get back to you in a second, but hopefully we'll be able to fix up the problems you've been having with the broadcast. The OMD, yes, it should have focus peaking. It would be somewhere in the main menu. The Olympus menus aren't super user friendly, so have a look in your manual. But the term focus peaking is pretty universal across the manufacturers. You should be able to find that one there. The Lumix, I'm not sure, to be honest, Tim, whether your specific camera has facial recognition. If you want to just leave the actual model number in the comments, I'll have a quick look after I've finished the class and see if I can Google an answer for you. It'll probably depend on how recent the model is. There aren't too many cameras made recently that don't have it, but anything that's maybe 3 years old or more was more of a niche sort of feature then. That, I think, is all the questions for now, so we'll leave it there. Tomorrow we are going to talk about shutter speed, which is the last thing that we're going to talk about for this week. But what that's going to do is give us almost all the tools we need in order to get to manual exposure. And we'll be able to jump into manual exposure next week and start to throw all these different techniques together and really take back a lot of control from our camera. The more control we have, the more consistent our photos will be. Just want to remind everyone again that we are open at the moment, 11 till 4, so reduced hours, but the shop is open if you'd like to go by, though we do encourage you to buy online, and the website's up 24/7. We are also available to chat online as well, so if you go to the website, you'll see a little chat now symbol on the web page, and you can give us a call if you'd like to. The phone number is 9672 2222. We'll leave it there. And hopefully I'll catch you again tomorrow for the last iteration of the photo hour for this week. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Catch you next time.